The Depression-era cook kept her best recipes penciled into the margins of a 5-cent cookbook, right between the tomato soup section and the chapter on cuts of beef. She fed a family of 6 on a single dollar bill, and most of those recipes never made it into a second printing. Number 21 on this list came straight out of the 1931 Joy of Cooking, back when a pound of navy beans cost 9 cents. Number 12 hides in a 1936 Fanny Farmer reprint that most libraries quietly tossed. And number 5 on this list shows up in a Better Homes and Gardens binder from 1942, written in a wartime kitchen that ran on ration coupons. For 40 years, these meals fed real American families through dust storms, rationing, and layoffs. Then they slid out of the cookbooks one reprint at a time until you had to know somebody's grandmother to find them again. So, hit subscribe and thumb the page with us because here are 30 forgotten $1 meals you could only find in old cookbooks. Number 30. Slug Burger. Northern Mississippi cooks invented this little patty when ground beef went past a working family's reach, and they stretched a quarter pound of meat into 4 sandwiches with potato flakes, flour, or cornmeal. The original price was a nickel, and in the 1930s, a nickel was called a slug, which is where the name came from. John Weeks ran the first stand in Corinth, and his trick was to deep fry the thinned patty so the outside crisped while the inside stayed tender. Mustard, raw onion, and a flat pickle were the only dressings served on a soft white bun from the bakery on the corner. Old cookbooks listed the filler ratio openly because nobody pretended it was all beef. Corinth still throws a slug burger festival every July, but the home recipe slid out of the binders one reprint at a time. Number 29. Hoover Stew. Families named this pot after the president they blamed for the bread lines, and the irony stuck so hard that the recipe outlived the administration. The bones of it were 4 ingredients you could keep on a shelf: a box of macaroni, a tin of stewed tomatoes, a can of corn, and a few hot dogs sliced into coins. The hot dogs went in last so the casing did not split, and the corn liquid went straight into the pot because nobody threw away a spoon of broth in 1932. Mothers in Hooverville camps cooked it over open fires in coffee cans, and the smell drifted between the tar paper shacks at supper time. A pound of macaroni at 6 cents and a nickel pack of Franks fed a family of 5. Old church cookbooks listed it under the name of macaroni stew, but the kids in the back pews knew exactly what it was. Number 28. Water pie. This one shows up in handwritten margins more than printed pages because no respectable editor wanted to admit the filling was tap water. The cook poured a cup and a half of water into an unbaked crust, sprinkled flour and sugar over the surface without stirring, dotted the top with butter pats, and slid it into a hot oven. The flour rose, the sugar caramelized, and the butter melted into a translucent custard that set into something like vanilla pudding by the time it cooled. Cooks in coal country called it hard times pie, and it ran 2 cents a slice when milk was a luxury and eggs went into the gravy first. The recipe disappeared from glossy cookbooks by 1955 because nobody wanted a reminder of the years it came from. Number 27. Hot milk cake. The penciled margins of that 5-cent cookbook held this one in 2 short lines because real Depression cooks did not waste ink on a recipe they already knew by heart. A cup of scalded milk hit the beaten eggs, sugar, and flour, and the heat of the milk did the work that creamed butter normally would. The batter cost roughly 14 cents to mix in 1933, and it stretched into a square pan that fed 8 slices for Sunday after church. The crumb came out fine and tight, almost like a sponge, and it stayed moist for 3 days under a clean tea towel. Bakeries sold it sliced for a penny apiece, but mothers made it at home because the oven was already on for the beans. Number 26. Hash browns and eggs. Diner counters across the Midwest built their breakfast trade on this plate, and the home version was even cheaper because nobody charged you 15 cents for a coffee refill. The potatoes went through a hand grater the night before, sat in cold water to bleed the starch, and got pressed dry in a flour sack towel before they ever met grease. 2 eggs cracked right into the well in the middle of the potato cake, and the lid went on so the whites set without flipping. The plate cost about 11 cents per serving in 1934. Pittsburgh steelworkers ate this before the morning whistle, and farm wives in Iowa served it at 5 in the morning before the chores started. Old Better Homes and Gardens binders ran a version with paprika, but most cooks left it off. Number 25. Tomato gravy. Southern grandmothers cooked this over a pan of bacon drippings, and the recipe never needed measuring because the ratio lived in their hands. A heaping spoon of flour went into the hot fat first, browned until it smelled like a peanut, and then a quart jar of home-canned tomatoes from the cellar got poured in slow. The whole thing thickened in 4 minutes and went straight over a split biscuit or a cold piece of cornbread. Working families in Alabama and Tennessee ate this for breakfast 3 mornings a week through the 1930s because tomatoes were the one thing the back garden produced in volume. The cost ran under a nickel a serving even at general store prices, and the leftovers got spooned over rice at supper. Number 24. Ham loaf. Pennsylvania Dutch kitchens turned the ragged ends of a smoked ham into this dense brown loaf, and the trick was to grind the ham fine with fresh pork shoulder at a 1-to-1 ratio. Crushed soda crackers, 2 beaten eggs, and a cup of whole milk held the grind together, and a thick glaze of brown sugar, cider vinegar, and ground cloves went over the top before it baked at 350 degrees. The whole loaf cost about 35 cents to assemble in 1938 and fed 6 people with thick slices left for cold sandwiches the next day. Lancaster County Church cookbooks ran 3 different versions on the same printed page, each one swearing the others were wrong about the vinegar ratio. Better Homes and Gardens kept the recipe in the binder through 1962 and then quietly dropped it from the next reprint. Number 23. Hominy casserole. Texas and Oklahoma kitchens leaned hard on this one because a 5-pound bag of dried hominy ran 19 cents at the general store, and one bag stretched across 2 full weeks of suppers. Cooks soaked the dried kernels overnight in cold salted water, drained them in the morning, and then simmered them with a smoked ham hock and a bay leaf all afternoon on the back of the wood stove. The soft hominy layered into a deep baking dish with sharp cheddar and a tin of canned green chilies, and a splash of evaporated milk went over the top before it slid into the oven. The whole casserole came out hot and creamy and tasted bigger than its 23-cent price tag suggested, which is exactly what tired farm families needed in 1936. Better Homes and Gardens dropped the recipe from the 1965 reprint, and it never came back. Number 22. Salmon loaf. The Alaska Packers Association handed out a little pamphlet at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair called How to Eat Canned Salmon, and 3 of the recipes inside were variations on this same loaf, which is how the dish entered American kitchens in the first place. The cook drained a tall can of pink salmon, picked out the round backbone with a fork because grandmothers always insisted, and mashed the fish into a bowl with crushed soda crackers, 1 beaten egg, half a cup of evaporated milk, and a spoon of yellow mustard. The whole mixture pressed into a loaf pan, baked at 350 degrees for 40 minutes, and came out the color of clay tile with a firm, sliceable crumb. A can of salmon ran 15 cents in 1934. The crackers were a nickel, and the egg cost a penny. So a loaf that fed 6 people landed under 25 cents. The dish carried more than economics. Catholic families ate it on Fridays during Lent because it was meatless under the rules of the time. Government nutrition pamphlets pushed it into Tennessee and Kentucky schools, prisons, and county hospitals because a can of salmon combined with cornbread and a bowl of beans delivered enough niacin to keep pellagra out of a family of 4 for the whole week. The loaf showed up cold on Saturday lunch plates, warm on Sunday supper tables, and chopped into sandwich filling for Monday's school lunchbox. By 1968, the recipe vanished from the glossy magazine cookbooks because canned tuna replaced it in the cultural memory, but the page lived on inside the wire-bound church cookbooks in Birmingham and Knoxville, where the working mothers still wrote in the margins. The loaf was never glamorous and never tried to be, and that is exactly why it carried 3 generations through the worst stretches of the century. Number 21. Navy bean soup. Number 21 on this list came straight out of the 1931 joy of cooking, back when a pound of navy beans cost 9 cents and a smoked ham hock ran another 12. Irma Rombauer printed the recipe in her self-published first edition, and 3,000 copies went out from a small press in St. Louis that normally printed shoebox labels. The cook soaked a pound of dried beans overnight in cold water, drained them in the morning, and dropped them into a heavy pot with the ham hock, a chopped yellow onion, and 6 cups of water. The whole pot simmered 3 hours over a low flame until the beans broke down and the broth turned thick and milky. A loaf of cornbread on the side turned 21 cents of groceries into a Sunday supper for 8 people. Number 20. Cream-chipped beef on toast. Soldiers nicknamed this one SOS in the trenches and on the troop ships, and the name stuck so hard that home cooks used it openly at the breakfast table by 1946. The 1910 Manual for Army Cooks held the first printed version, and the August 1944 TM10-412 Field Manual fixed the recipe in the form that came home with 2 million returning servicemen. A jar of dried beef ran 19 cents, shredded by hand into a hot pan of butter and flour, and a cup of whole milk went in slow with constant stirring until the gravy thickened. The salty beef did the seasoning work on its own, so the cook added nothing else but black pepper. The pan poured over 2 slices of toasted bread, and a family of 5 ate breakfast for under 40 cents in 1948. Number 19. Cabbage rolls. Slovak and Polish immigrant families brought this dish into the steel towns of western Pennsylvania, and the recipe spread through Pittsburgh parish cookbooks, one wire-bound printing at a time. The cook blanched a whole head of green cabbage in salted water, peeled off the leaves one by one, and rolled a spoon of seasoned ground pork mixed with cooked rice into each leaf. The rolls layered tight in a deep pot, covered in canned tomato sauce and a splash of sauerkraut juice, and simmered 2 hours on the back of the stove. A head of cabbage ran 6 cents in 1937. The ground pork was 22 cents a pound, and the pan fed 8 Friday shift mill workers for under 60 cents. The recipe vanished from chain bookstore cookbooks by the late 1970s. Number 18. Liver and onions. Butcher counters across Chicago and Cleveland sold beef liver for 9 cents a pound through the 1930s because nobody with money wanted it, which is exactly why working families ate it twice a week. The cook soaked the sliced liver in cold milk for an hour to pull the bitter edge out, dredged it in seasoned flour, and laid it in a hot pan with bacon drippings on top of sliced yellow onions. The onions cooked down into a sweet brown jam. The liver hit the pan last for just 2 minutes aside, and the plate came together in under 15 minutes. The dish carried iron, which county doctors handed out as advice to mothers raising children on lean rations. Good Housekeeping ran a version in May of 1934. If you like these old recipes, the full Vintage Lifestyle USA Recipe Guide collects more than 100 of them with the original measurements and the original cooking times, pulled straight from the same cookbooks we are flipping through right now. The link sits in the description under the video, and the guide downloads as a single PDF you can keep on the kitchen counter. Now, back to the countdown. Number 17. Bread pudding. The 5-cent cookbook had this one written in 3 lines because no Depression-era cook needed more than that to remember the steps. Stale bread torn into a buttered baking dish, 2 beaten eggs whisked into a quart of warm milk with half a cup of sugar and vanilla, the custard poured over the bread, and a dust of cinnamon on top. The dish baked in a slow oven for 45 minutes until the top went golden and the inside set into a soft, sweet pillow. Cooks added raisins if the pantry had them, leftover apple slices in October, and a splash of bourbon if the head of the house was due home from a hard shift. The dessert cost roughly 8 cents in 1935 and fed 6 people warm out of the pan. The 1918 Fanny Farmer called it the most useful sweet in the American kitchen. Number 16. Pork brains and eggs. Southern breakfast plates in Mississippi and Arkansas leaned on this dish through the 1930s and the 1940s, and the can of Rose brand brains and gravy sold for 19 cents through the 1960s at every general store from Memphis down to New Orleans. The cook poached the brains in salted water for a few minutes to firm them up, drained them, chopped them rough, and scrambled them into a pan of beaten eggs with a knob of butter. The texture came out soft and creamy and a little richer than plain eggs, and the dish carried a working man through a full morning of mill or field work. A can of brains and 6 eggs ran under 40 cents and fed a family of 5 at the breakfast table. Number 15. Tomato soup cake. Across the kitchens of the upper Midwest, working mothers turned a 10-cent can of Campbell's condensed tomato soup into a moist spice cake that nobody at the table would have guessed contained tomato. The cook creamed a half cup of shortening with sugar, beat in 2 eggs, sifted 2 cups of flour with baking soda and a heavy dose of cinnamon and cloves, and stirred the undiluted can of soup straight into the batter. Chopped walnuts and raisins went in last, and the pan baked at 350 degrees for 40 minutes. The cake came out a soft russet color with a crumb so tender that a fork barely held a slice together. Number 14. Cornbread and milk. Stretching a single skillet of cornbread into supper for 5 people was a trick that Appalachian grandmothers worked out long before any cookbook editor caught wind of it. The cook crumbled a thick wedge of cold cornbread into a heavy china bowl, poured a tall glass of cold whole milk over the top, and handed it down the table with nothing more than a sprinkle of salt or a drizzle of cane syrup. The bowl cost roughly 4 cents in 1934, counting the cornmeal at 6 cents a pound and the milk at 11 cents a quart. Farm men in eastern Tennessee ate it standing at the kitchen counter after the last lamp went out, and church suppers in the coal hollows of Kentucky served it when the cobbler ran short. Old progressive farmer cookbooks ran it under the heading of evening bread. Number 13. Scrapple. She started this one the morning after a hog butchering, simmering the head, the heart, and the trimmings in a deep pot of salted water for 3 hours until the meat fell clean off the bone. The cook strained the broth, picked the meat fine, and stirred a slow rain of yellow cornmeal and buckwheat flour into the simmering liquid until the whole pot thickened into a heavy mush. Sage, black pepper, and a touch of marjoram seasoned the loaf, and the mush poured into bread pans to cool overnight in the cold pantry. The next morning, a thick slice came out firm enough to slide into a hot pan of bacon grease, where it crisped on both sides in under 4 minutes. A whole pan ran the family of 7 cents a serving in 1937, and the loaf kept a Pennsylvania Dutch household in breakfast for a full week. Number 12. Mock apple pie. Tucked near the back of the dessert chapter, the 1936 Fanny Farmer reprint hides this one in a column so narrow that most readers turned the page before they noticed it. Cooks in apple-poor counties from West Texas to the Oklahoma Panhandle reached for a sleeve of Ritz crackers, which debuted in November of 1934 at 19 cents a box, and broke 20 crackers into an unbaked pie shell. A syrup of 2 cups of water, a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar, and the juice of half a lemon came to a hard boil and poured directly over the crackers. A pat of butter and cinnamon went on top. The lattice crust closed the pie, and the whole thing baked for 35 minutes until the syrup bubbled through the slats. A finished pie cost roughly 22 cents in 1936, against a real apple pie that ran past 40 cents. Number 11. Hoe cakes. There was a long Southern tradition behind these flat cornmeal rounds, going back to field hands who cooked them on the blade of a garden hoe held over an open fire. The cook stirred a cup and a half of white cornmeal with a half teaspoon of salt and enough boiling water to make a stiff batter, dropped heaping spoonfuls into a hot greased skillet, and pressed each one flat with the back of a wet spoon. The edges crisped golden in 2 minutes aside, and the inside stayed tender and slightly sweet from the cornmeal alone. A pound of stone-ground cornmeal ran 7 cents at the country store in 1935, and a stack of 8 hoe cakes fed a hungry family of 4 for under a nickel total. The 1881 What Mrs. Fisher Knows cookbook printed the first published version under the name Corn Batter Cakes. Number 10. Cabbage soup. Pouring a quart of cold water over a quartered head of green cabbage and letting it simmer for an hour was the kind of meal that nobody bragged about and everybody knew how to make. The cook added a chopped yellow onion, a peeled carrot, 2 small potatoes cubed fine, and a single ham bone if the pantry held one. The pot needed nothing else but salt and a heavy grind of black pepper, and the broth turned pale green gold by the time it hit the table. A head of cabbage ran 5 cents in 1933, and the potatoes came fresh from the back garden for nothing. The 1934 Searchlight recipe book printed the recipe under the heading of country garden soup, and church suppers in rural Ohio served it through the lean Tuesday nights. Number 9. Baked beans and brown bread. Across the kitchens of Boston and the small mill towns of southern New Hampshire, Saturday night supper was this same plate for 3 generations running, and the cookbooks barely needed to print the recipe because every cook learned it from her mother. A pound of dried navy beans soaked overnight went into a deep bean pot with a 1/4 pound of salt pork, a chopped onion, a 1/2 cup of molasses, 2 spoons of brown sugar, and dry mustard. The pot baked at 250 degrees for 6 hours, lid on for the first 4 and off for the last 2, until the sauce thickened into a dark, sticky glaze. Steamed brown bread sliced into thick rounds went alongside, made from rye flour, cornmeal, and molasses, steamed in a coffee can on the back of the stove. Number 8. Dandelion greens with bacon. Picture a backyard in early April, the dandelions just up, and the leaves still tender before the flower stalk pushed them bitter. Coal country families in West Virginia and the hill counties of Kentucky walked the yard with a paring knife on a Sunday morning and cut 2 grocery bags of young dandelion greens for free. The cook washed the greens 3 times in cold water, chopped them rough, and wilted them down in a hot pan with 4 slices of bacon and a splash of cider vinegar. A halved, hard-boiled egg crumbled over the top added a little richness without breaking the budget. The skillet cost about 6 cents in 1936, counting nothing for the greens themselves, and it carried iron and vitamin C through the lean weeks before the spring garden came in. Number 7. Fried mush. When wheat flour ran short in farm pantries from Ohio to Nebraska through the worst stretches of the 1930s, cooks reached for the bag of yellow cornmeal that always sat on the shelf and made this twice-cooked breakfast. The first night, a pot of cornmeal mush thickened on the back of the stove with nothing more than salt and a teaspoon of butter, then poured into a buttered loaf pan to cool overnight in the cold kitchen, set up tight enough to slice. The next morning, a thick slab fried in bacon drippings until the outside crisped dark gold and the inside stayed soft and creamy. Sorghum syrup or thinned molasses poured over the top, and a fried egg landed on the side if the henhouse cooperated through the night. A serving cost roughly 3 cents in 1934 at country store prices. Number 6. Biscuits and gravy. In the hill kitchens of the Ozarks, a pound of breakfast sausage at 23 cents and a pound of flour at 5 cents was all a cook needed to put 8 people in front of a hot plate before the morning whistle blew. The cook browned the loose sausage in a heavy iron pan, sprinkled 3 heaping spoons of flour over the rendered grease, and stirred the roux until it smelled like toasted bread. 2 cups of whole milk went in slow with constant whisking, and the gravy thickened in 4 minutes into something the color of soft cement with a heavy grind of black pepper. Split buttermilk biscuits went face up on the plate, the gravy ladled over the top, and the whole breakfast came in under 12 cents a serving in 1937. Number 5. Spam loaf. A 1942 Better Homes and Gardens binder with a wartime supplement printed this dish on a single page, and the page took a careful eye to find because ration coupons dictated the meat budget down to the ounce. Hormel had launched Spam in July of 1937 at 29 cents a can, and by 1942 it sat on almost every American shelf because canned meat did not count against the red coupon ration. The cook turned a 12-ounce tin out, mashed it rough with a fork, and mixed it with crushed soda crackers, 2 beaten eggs, a half cup of whole milk, a chopped yellow onion, and yellow mustard. The mixture pressed into a loaf pan, took a glaze of brown sugar and cider vinegar, and baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. A loaf fed 6 people for under 30 cents, and the leftovers sliced cold for school lunch sandwiches the next morning. Number 4. Welsh Rarebit. Cracking a fresh egg yolk into a pan of melted sharp cheddar was the trick that turned a plate of cheese on toast into a Sunday supper dish in the parsonage kitchens of New England and the brick row houses of working-class Philadelphia. The cook melted a half-pound of sharp cheddar in a heavy double boiler over low heat, stirred in a half-cup of warm beer or whole milk, added dry mustard, a dash of Worcestershire, and an egg yolk at the very end so the sauce did not break. The hot rarebit poured over thick slices of toasted bread, and a few slices of grilled tomato or pickled chow chow finished the plate. A half-pound of sharp cheddar ran 21 cents in 1936, and the supper fed 4 people for under 30 cents. Number 3. Beef stew. On the back roads of Vermont and the dairy farms of western Wisconsin, a 1-pound chunk of beef chuck at 13 cents a pound stretched into a Sunday night pot that fed 8 people with a thick slice of bread on the side. The cook cubed the chuck rough, dredged the pieces in seasoned flour, and browned them in bacon drippings on the bottom of a heavy enamel pot. 4 cups of cold water and a bay leaf went in next, and the pot simmered low for 2 hours until the meat fell apart at the push of a fork. 5 small potatoes, 3 carrots, 2 onions, and a half cup of frozen peas added late, and a slurry of flour and cold water thickened the broth in the last 10 minutes. The whole pot came to under 40 cents in 1935, which is what a working family with 5 hungry mouths could afford to spend on a single supper. Number 2. Johnny cakes. If a Rhode Island family ran out of wheat flour in a snowed-in February, this little fried cornmeal cake stood in for biscuits, pancakes, and dinner rolls in the same week without anybody at the table noticing. The cook stirred 2 cups of stone-ground white cornmeal with a half teaspoon of salt, poured in 2 cups of boiling water in a slow stream, and beat the batter hard until it lifted off the spoon in a heavy ribbon. Heaping spoonfuls dropped onto a hot greased griddle, flattened with a wet spatula, and crisped for 3 minutes aside until the edges turned deep golden brown. A pat of butter and a splash of pure maple syrup topped each cake, and a stack of 6 fed a family of 4 with a few left for the pail at noon. Stone-ground white cornmeal ran 8 cents a pound in 1934, and the breakfast came in under a dime a head. The 1896 Boston Cooking School Cookbook printed the recipe under the heading of New England Johnny Cakes. Number 1. Vinegar pie. They called this one desperation pie in the homestead kitchens of the Western Plains because the cook reached for it only when the henhouse came up empty and the cellar held no fruit. The recipe needed nothing but pantry shelf staples that any settler family kept on hand through winter. The cook whisked a half cup of cider vinegar with 2 cups of water and a cup of sugar in a heavy saucepan, brought it to a slow simmer, and stirred in 3 heaping spoons of flour slurried with cold water until the filling thickened into a clear amber custard. A dust of cinnamon and a pat of butter went in at the end, and the filling poured into a single crust pie shell to set in the cool pantry for an hour. A finished pie cost under 15 cents in 1933, and the tart sweet filling tasted close enough to lemon meringue that a hungry farm child did not ask questions. Rutabaga hash was a clever dish that made the most of rutabagas, which were cheaper and more plentiful than potatoes during the Depression. Families would chop the firm root into small cubes, frying it with onions and whatever fat they could find. The rutabaga softened and browned, giving a texture and taste that mimicked potatoes closely enough to satisfy hungry families. Sometimes scraps of bacon or ham were added for flavor, but more often it was just the vegetables alone. The hash was hearty, filling, and adaptable, often appearing at both breakfast and dinner tables. Since rutabagas grew well in harsh conditions, they were dependable crops when potatoes ran short. Many children grew up not realizing their parents had been serving them substitutes because the crispy fried cubes tasted so much like the real thing. Rutabaga hash showed how families made necessity feel normal, turning cheap vegetables into meals that could carry them through some of the hardest years in memory. Smoked picnic ham with brown sugar was another really inexpensive way to stretch ingredients without breaking the bank. You might not know, but refined sugar actually pretty much became a myth in homes back then. In more bougie neighborhoods, sure, you'd pop open a cabinet and see some sitting pretty, but for everyone else, that just wasn't the case. Refined sugar was a rarity and also an expensive ingredient to buy. Brown sugar, on the other hand, was the perfect fix. Cheap, available easily, and barely distinguishable, it was the backbone of a lot of wartime cooking. Also, the smoked picnic ham isn't really authentic either, at least not in the way you're thinking. Ham usually is made from the hind leg, but picnic ham is cured, and it's cut out of the shoulder. It's got mostly the same texture, but it's a bit on the cheaper side because it's tougher and has a higher fat percentage, which wasn't really a bad thing. I mean, the people were definitely lacking some of that in their diet. Smoked picnic hams with brown sugar were most regularly made around things like Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was a nifty little way to make everyone feel like they were celebrating. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. Now, people who had chickens as pets had the luxury of eating hard-boiled eggs for breakfast. Let's be honest, we all love a sunny side-up, but hard-boiled eggs just hit differently. This classic breakfast food got a workout during the Dust Bowl. Eggs were a valuable source of protein and could be stored for a longer time. Eggs, when hard-boiled, had a longer shelf life compared to raw eggs. This made them a practical choice for preservation, as they could be stored and used over time without spoiling quickly. Plus, boiling eggs is easy no matter how challenging the times get. They could be sliced into salads, added to casseroles, or simply enjoyed as a snack. These weren't just a breakfast item. These eggs were also used in dinner meals and were often served with white sauce over rice. In Texas, as well as New York, rice with raisins started becoming a really popular dish among the middle class and a breakfast that many children grew up on, especially in Indian American communities, which were sparse at the time, but they were still there every other block or two. It was already customary to eat rice with milk and raisins there, so they brought it to America, and others took note. They were not the only ones to introduce it, though, since Chinese Americans also had their own take on the recipe that led to a more custard-like variant. When people could not afford to even eat rice pudding, they would make their rice and eat it with different kinds of nuts and raisins. Hot dog fried rice was the 1980s answer to fast food when nobody could afford the drive-thru. You'd grab the leftover rice from the night before, toss it into a skillet, and chop up a few hot dogs to throw in. The soy sauce packets saved from cheap takeout finally earned their keep, sizzling as they hit the pan. The smell filled every corner of the kitchen, salty and smoky with a little sweetness from the rice. If you had an egg, you'd crack it right in and stir fast, watching it turn the whole thing golden. If you didn't, no one complained. The hot dogs carried enough flavor to make it feel like a real meal. It looked humble, but it tasted like triumph. Families made it at the end of the week when groceries ran low, and somehow it always hit the spot. It stretched scraps into dinner, turned leftovers into pride, and reminded everyone that creativity was just as filling as wealth. Kids didn't know it was poverty food. To them, it was comfort on a plate. Hot dog fried rice was the flavor of resilience, sizzling proof that even struggle could taste good if you knew how to fry it right. Hamburger hash was the skillet miracle that made every child in the house sprint to the kitchen the moment they smelled it cooking. Mothers made it by combining ground beef, diced potatoes, onions, and whatever seasonings they had on hand, stretching a small amount of meat into a meal that fed everyone without costing much. The potatoes would brown slowly, getting crisp on the edges and soft in the middle, while the onions melted down into something sweet and perfect. The beef sizzled alongside everything, creating this savory blend that filled the entire home with a smell that no hungry kid could resist. It was a one-pan treasure, the kind of meal that made the kitchen feel warm and alive. Kids loved it because every spoonful felt different. Some bites more potato, some more meat, some deliciously heavy on onion. It was the kind of dish you could pile high on a plate and still go back for seconds, even thirds if you were lucky. Mothers liked that it stretched ingredients, saved money, and kept stomachs full for hours. Many families added ketchup, some added gravy, some ate it exactly as it came out of the pan. There was no wrong way to enjoy hamburger hash. It was cozy, hearty, and the definition of comfort food long before that phrase became trendy. Kids begged for it because it tasted like home in the most uncomplicated way possible, like the kind of dinner that made the whole family sit together without any fuss. It was simple, cheap, and unforgettable. which is exactly why it became a quiet legend in so many 1960s homes. Liver and onions were the meal that tested your strength. This was not a dinner kids begged for. It was one you survived. A plate of pan-fried beef liver, dark and dense, smothered in soft, translucent onions that were supposed to make it taste better. The smell alone was enough to make you gag. But liver was cheap, it was full of nutrients, and it was not rationed like other cuts during wartime. So you ate it. You cut tiny pieces and tried to swallow without chewing. You drowned it in ketchup or mustard, anything to make it go down faster. Your parents called it good for you. You called it punishment. But there it was, week after week, staring back at you from a chipped plate, while the onions slid around like ghosts. And if you finished it, you felt like you had won something. You had not. But you felt that way. And sometimes, that was enough. Zucchini tomato layer. Bake turned overflowing summer gardens into a warm and colorful family meal that fit any budget. Thin slices of zucchini were alternated with canned tomatoes inside a buttered casserole dish, sprinkled lightly with breadcrumbs and a handful of grated cheese. As it baked, the vegetables released their juices, blending with the cheese to create a savory sauce that required no extra effort. This dish became a staple during peak harvest months, when zucchini was plentiful and nearly free from backyard gardens or neighborhood swaps. Home cooks appreciated how easily it adapted to what they had on hand, allowing the addition of fresh herbs or a scattering of leftover rice to make it more filling. Served hot with crusty bread, it offered a complete vegetarian supper that satisfied even the most dedicated meat eaters. The simple preparation, bright flavors, and low cost made it a dependable recipe that graced countless 1960s dinner tables, celebrating the abundance of late summer produce while keeping grocery bills comfortably low for hardworking families. Rice croquettes were a depression trick for turning yesterday's leftovers into something new and appetizing. When rice was cooked in large batches, families often had more than they could finish, and waste was simply not an option. Leftover rice was mashed together with a bit of flour or egg when available, then shaped into small balls and fried in a skillet with fat or drippings. The result was a golden, crispy outside and a soft, chewy inside that children especially loved. Adults appreciated how croquettes added texture and flavor to meals that were otherwise bland. They could be served with gravy, broth, or just eaten plain, offering flexibility depending on what was on hand. In some households, croquettes became the centerpiece of dinner when no meat was available. They proved that resourcefulness in the kitchen could transform scraps into something enjoyable. Families remembered rice croquettes not just as a thrifty dish, but as a rare moment when leftovers felt special instead of repetitive. They were simple, but in hard times, simplicity was often the best comfort of all. 3-bean baked beans were one of the best hits to come out of wartime cooking. They were a great source of protein, easy to grow, and readily available. Plus, a pot of these beans would set you and your entire family up for the rest of the day, and probably the next one too. You really wanted recipes that didn't have a lot of specifics. You know those recipes on food blogs where if you substitute 1 or 2 ingredients, use what you have on hand, and call it a day, it falls apart? Yeah, that was not the vibe here at all. If we're talking about the themes of wartime cooking, 3-bean baked beans show us all of them. An adaptable recipe with ingredients you can find everywhere for cheap with a lot of crowd-pleasing ability. Basic beans like navy, kidney, and lima beans were used. If you were in the South, you'd probably see a lot more of black beans, which were actually given a little more credit. Any gym rats watching should note that they're better for protein. Not only was it really easy to make and prepare, it was also really comforting to hit. That goes double if we're talking about winters. And man, those winters were really harsh. Imagine a world without fancy desserts or indulgent snacks. Well, that pretty much sums up the Dust Bowl era for you. Enter milk toast, which was one of the only sweet treats offered in the 30s. Milk toast was a breakfast dish consisting of toasted bread and warm milk, typically with sugar and butter. Some fancier variations included salt, pepper, paprika, cinnamon, cocoa, and raisins. Milk toast was a popular food throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially for young children. Now, this was the first choice for those feeling under the weather back in the day. Yeah, it was the classic sick people food of the Dust Bowl era. Often served with a pat of butter or a sprinkle of sugar, milk toast was a gentle food that was easy on the stomach. Potatoes had more use than just what was under all the layers. Once peeled, people would often fry the potato skins as a midday snack. Nothing would ever go to waste in homes back then, as you must have gathered by now. If they can make stuff out of sausage drippings and drain the fat from bacon to reuse, frying up some potato skins does not seem that out of the box at all. These fried skins were the perfect sidekick to potato pancakes, and the fact that the skins had a lot of health benefits made it all the more appealing. Things like this really helped to keep appetites in check, and that meant that the financial situation of the home would be calmer too. Peanut butter bread pudding was the dessert you made when every sweet thing in the house was gone, but no one wanted to end dinner on an empty note. You'd tear up old bread, pour over a mix of milk, sugar, and a few spoonfuls of peanut butter, then bake until the top turned golden and sticky. The smell filled the house like a warm blanket. It was thick, sweet, and rich enough to make you forget how cheap it was. No one wasted bread back then. It was too precious. If you had bananas or raisins, you could toss those in, but most times it was just bread, milk, and peanut butter working overtime. Families made it in square pans or cast iron skillets, serving it hot with a drizzle of syrup if they were lucky. It wasn't a fancy dessert, but it was one that made you close your eyes with that first bite. Peanut butter bread pudding was poor folks' decadence, a taste of comfort that didn't cost a dime extra. Vegetable curry stew introduced a mild touch of international flavor to American kitchens while staying firmly in the realm of affordable comfort food. Potatoes, carrots, onions, and canned chickpeas simmered slowly with a gentle dusting of curry powder, filling the house with a warm, spiced aroma that felt both new and familiar. The recipe was flexible enough to accept any vegetables on hand, making it ideal for gardeners or thrifty shoppers. During the 1960s, when interest in global flavors was growing, this stew offered a budget-friendly way to explore something different without leaving the home kitchen. Served with plain rice or a slice of crusty bread, it delivered a complete protein and plenty of satisfying texture. Families discovered that the spices brightened otherwise simple ingredients, proving that excitement at the dinner table did not require expensive meats or specialty imports. Vegetable curry stew stands as a delicious example of how mid-century cooks embraced fresh ideas while still practicing the frugality and adaptability that defined their daily meals. Cabbage and noodles, Pulaski if your grandma called it that, was a gift from the old country wrapped in poverty. You boiled egg noodles until they were soft, but not mush. You fried cabbage and onions in butter or oil until they collapsed into golden ribbons. Then you tossed it all together and prayed the flavor was enough. It was peasant food, proudly so. Born from resourcefulness, not recipes. Even when money vanished, this meal stayed dependable, like a friend who never left. It was not pretty, and it did not try to be. Just beige on beige with a hint of steam. But it filled the house with the kind of smell that made you feel like someone was taking care of you. Even if that someone was just you, doing your best. The dish had roots in Eastern Europe, but in American kitchens it became something else. An immigrant memory passed down through empty cupboards and tight budgets. You could eat a giant plate for under $1 and still feel like you ate something real. Because you did. Canned spaghetti and meatballs was the simple, straight-from-the-can miracle that 1960s kids thought tasted like restaurant food. Mothers bought it because it was cheap, fast, and required nothing but heating. The noodles were soft, the tiny meatballs were tender, and the sweet tomato sauce felt comforting and familiar. Kids always rushed in as soon as the can opener clicked, knowing exactly what smell would fill the kitchen next. It was messy, fun, and easy to eat. The kind of dinner kids slurped instead of politely ate. Mothers relied on it for long days and tight budgets, and kids loved it because it felt like a treat. It tasted like late dinners after playing outside and simple joy without explanation. Canned spaghetti and meatballs were cheap comfort disguised as something special. Cheese water soup might sound pitiful at first, but to families scraping by, it was survival disguised as comfort. When the pantry was empty, the milk long gone, and payday still days away, a spoonful of powdered cheese stirred into boiling water was enough to lift spirits. The steam carried the smell of warmth, even if the meal itself was little more than wishful thinking. Parents whisked it fast so the powder would melt smooth, creating the illusion of a creamy broth. A few shakes of pepper or a torn piece of stale bread on the side turned it into a full supper. Kids didn't question it. They called it cheese soup and slurped it proudly. It was salty, thin, and simple, but it filled the belly and soothed the mind. For adults, it was less about flavor and more about dignity, proof that even when the cupboards were bare, there was still something to feed the family. Cheesewater soup wasn't a dish people bragged about making, but everyone who lived through hard times remembered it. It was the taste of perseverance poured into a chipped bowl, reminding everyone that even the humblest meal could feel like home. So most oatmeal meatloaf recipes use the oats as a side piece to, like, 2 pounds of lean ground beef, but that was obviously not what people were working with back then. Instead, the loaf was made entirely of layers of oatmeal, with sausages and bacon stuffed into it to give that meaty profile. Some dried onions and garlic meant that there was good enough reason to get the fine plates out, and there was always enough to go around too. Plus, grandmas really ran with the recipe right after the Depression ended and things started going back to normal. They would add things like tomato sauces and never spare the eggs or the flour. Probably why kids would love it so much since they went all out with it. But after going through a patch where this was a luxury, you cannot blame them for wanting to go the extra mile either. Vegetarian chopped liver was a pretty good alternative to the lack of meat overall. I know I also said that liver was a bit more popular thanks to the rationing and the tight supply of meat, but even that would run out at some point. Plus, these aren't concrete facts that apply to every area or neighborhood. Places in the South had a way different focus in regards to their diet than people in California or Washington. Rural neighborhoods definitely couldn't afford meat of any kind, premium cut or bottom-of-the-barrel stuff. Thanks to that, vegetarian food really took off. The scene was pretty much already set for it, with mock food culture constantly proving that you can at least get comfortably close to the flavors you couldn't have. Vegetables were just another way of imitating those same dishes, but this time in a way that doesn't put a hole in your finances. Chopped liver was pretty much a massive staple in Ashkenazi Jewish culture, but they started putting out vegetarian chopped liver recipes thanks to all the shortages, which were extremely regular. So what would you do when even most vegetables would run out? Well, people honestly just had their gardens and neighbors to fall back on. It was at the peak of the shortages where people would resort to pretty much onions stuffed with grape nuts or potato soup or just toast. Grape nuts were still just a little bit new since they were only properly introduced into the country by 1897. Of course, people warmed up to it pretty fast, given their current circumstances. It was such a good way of stuffing up onions, which were already pretty loaded with vitamins, that people just started doing it nationwide. Families really took to meatless meals because they kept them full more often and were cheaper too. The nuts were a way of adding some very direly needed sweetness to the onions. The real kicker is that you could actually just grow these right out of your victory garden. People were collecting crops like they were gold, and the ones that were super easy to grow were the most important. Still, even with the grape nuts, onions weren't exactly an inspiring lunch. No wonder you don't ever hear about this stuff, even if you look into the 50s and 60s. Salted popcorn supper might sound like a snack today, but during the Depression it often stood in for a real meal. Popcorn was inexpensive, easy to make in large quantities, and filling enough to take the edge off hunger. Families would pop big bowls of it, sprinkle salt over the top, and gather around to share it for dinner. While it lacked the nutrition of meat or vegetables, it was a warm, shared experience that brought families together. Children saw it as a treat, while adults knew it was simply necessity disguised as fun. Sometimes popcorn was paired with milk or molasses water to add substance, but often it stood on its own. Neighbors also used popcorn suppers at gatherings, stretching limited food to feed a crowd. The dish represents how families redefined what supper meant when resources were at their lowest. It was proof that even the humblest food could provide comfort when eaten together, turning scarcity into moments of connection and shared resilience. Wartime living during World War II really shows you how much people worked with so little. During the war, butter and margarine were rationed pretty extensively too. That basically meant your local diet had a big void where fats should be, and that wasn't good for anyone. You'd need that stuff to cook or bake and just to get on with your week. Dripping was people's easy, one-stop solution to this crisis. When you'd roast meat, you'd get drippings from it. This wasn't just used once, but again and again as many times as possible. Pork or beef fat is another term for dripping, and it's still used in places today. But during the war, every home was working like this. There was such a strong mentality of not letting even a single part of an animal go to waste, and that didn't just include the meat and bones, but also the fat. I guess it's pretty admirable how much the brain can think of when you find yourself in situations like this. In about 25 minutes, you had yourself a quality and healthy meal that kept your energy going for all the labor of the week. This recipe really made a name for itself during the mid-1930s to 40s when people were facing a dire shortage of eggs. Still, if you did not have even some potatoes on hand but still wanted a pancake to cheer your kids up, you would go for eggless pancakes. Some shortening, sugar, milk, and salt were all you needed to make this version of the beloved American dish, plus just some water to bind if you could not find any milk to spare. Lucky were the homes that had lard, as that really made for some fluffy and thick cakes, but complaining was not really something people did during those times. A simple recipe like this let them revisit the taste of pancakes from back when they had fully stocked fridges, after all. Instant oatmeal muffins were breakfast alchemy at its absolute finest, a miracle born out of leftovers and imagination. You'd empty a few packets of flavored oatmeal, apple, cinnamon, maple, or whatever was left, into a mixing bowl, crack in an egg, add a splash of milk, and stir until it looked close enough to real batter. The texture wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. You'd pour it into greased muffin tins and bake it just long enough for the kitchen to fill with the smell of brown sugar and comfort. Moms picked up the trick from neighbors, TV ads, or recipe clippings taped to the fridge. 2 oatmeal packets could somehow stretch into 6 muffins, and that was magic in itself. They came out soft, warm, and sweet, just right for little hands on their way to school. Raisins made them feel fancy, chocolate chips made them feel like dessert, and even plain they hit every craving. Instant oatmeal muffins weren't about showing off, they were about showing love with whatever you had. They were the kind of breakfast that didn't look like struggle, it looked like care. For families trying to stretch the grocery bill one more week, that was everything. Frito pie in its cafeteria style was the chaotic, crunchy, messy masterpiece that 1960s kids absolutely adored. It was not fancy or expensive, but it tasted like pure childhood joy. Corn chips formed the base, sometimes poured onto a plate, sometimes eaten straight from the bag. Hot chili or seasoned beef melted the chips just enough, and a shower of cheese glued the whole thing together. Kids loved the mix of textures: crispy edges, soft centers, savory meat, and gooey cheese. It felt fun and a little rebellious, like party food pretending to be dinner. Mothers loved how quick and cheap it was, perfect for busy nights. To kids, it tasted like loud cafeteria lunches, and after-school laughter. Frito pie was pure 1960s magic, unforgettable to anyone who grew up with it. Canned ravioli was the Italian dinner that came in a can and never asked for praise. You popped open the metal lid, poured the heavy red sauce into a pot or a bowl, and microwaved it until it bubbled around the edges. The smell was artificial, the sauce too sweet, and the ravioli too soft, but none of that mattered, because it was food. And sometimes that was the only requirement. Chef Boyardee was not a chef in your kitchen, he was a lifeline, a shortcut to something that felt like a meal even if it came from a shelf instead of a stove. You ate it straight from the bowl, sometimes with a slice of bread to soak up the sauce. Other times, just a fork and a quick prayer that no one noticed how many nights in a row you were eating the same thing. The meat inside the pasta was more memory than substance. a whisper of protein in a sea of tomato. But it was hot, and it was filling, and it kept the stomach quiet when the cupboards were mostly bare. You were not proud of it, but you were grateful, because for $1 or less, it gave you something to hold on to. Celery and cheese soufflé brought elegance to an inexpensive vegetable that most people considered only a snack or soup ingredient. Finely chopped celery was sautéed with a bit of butter and folded into a fluffy base of beaten eggs and grated cheese before being baked until the top rose and browned. Despite its sophisticated appearance, the ingredients were simple and affordable, making it a popular choice for dinner parties on a budget. The soufflé delivered a gentle crunch from the celery against the airy texture of the eggs, surprising guests who expected something plain. Because the recipe relied on pantry staples like milk, eggs, and a small amount of cheese, it fit perfectly into the frugal cooking philosophy of the time. Home cooks loved that it felt fancy without requiring costly ingredients or specialized equipment. Served with a crisp salad or a slice of toasted bread, this dish turned an ordinary evening into a special occasion and demonstrated how a humble vegetable could take center stage in a memorable meal. Carrot marmalade was a sweet spread that helped families feel like they had something luxurious for breakfast, even in the toughest years of the Depression. Sugar was precious, but when it could be managed, grated carrots simmered down with citrus peel made a bright orange jam that tasted far richer than its ingredients suggested. Citrus itself was not always available, so many recipes leaned heavily on the carrots, using peel or extract when possible. The finished marmalade was thick, fragrant, and easily spread across homemade bread or crackers, turning simple staples into something that felt festive. Children loved its sweetness, and parents appreciated how it stretched a handful of carrots into enough jam to last for several mornings. Many community cookbooks published carrot marmalade recipes, encouraging families to rely on what they could grow in gardens. It was a dish that turned scarcity into creativity, and for many households it became a small comfort that brightened otherwise plain and repetitive meals. Fish soufflé and baked potatoes were a wonderful combination, the kind of thing that just bounces off of the beach of its different parts and sides. The fish soufflé, along with a generous serving of baked potato, wasn't just delicious, it was also extremely nutritious. This was probably one of the recipes that kept up health the most throughout the whole ordeal. You might be wondering how fish was common enough for the recipe to have this kind of weight behind it. It just so happens that if you lived near a coastal city back then, you were definitely in luck, at least compared to the rest of the population. Fishing skyrocketed, not as a hobby this time, but as a necessary skill. Fish were plentiful, and most of all, they were free. They were the main source of nutrition for a lot of places. When people had no use for fish as food, they'd sell it to make some quick money and get whatever necessities they needed. Besides, it was common enough to get things like crab in the waters back then too. Egg drop soup sounds a little fancier than it is, but have you never had a simple dish that knocked the socks off of you? Just a 2 or 3 ingredient show that really hit home, ticked every box, and left you with a smile? Egg drop soup was a lot like that. It was just diced potatoes and onions, which might get you thinking of the pie we just went over, but this is more like a broth. If chicken broth was there, then of course that was the foundation, but water worked too. Once the potatoes started cooking, you would drizzle some scrambled eggs before adding whole ones. It might look lumpy and score a little less for presentation, but it deserves a solid A+ just for the taste alone, especially if you would pair it with some leftover bread. Ritz cracker chicken coating turned every oven into a poor man's fryer and every Sunday night into a feast worth waiting for. You'd crush up a full sleeve of buttery Ritz crackers inside a plastic bag until they were fine and crumbly, then roll chicken legs, thighs, or even drumsticks through a bowl of beaten eggs before covering them completely in the crumbs. Once they hit the oven, the smell alone could fill the house with the promise of something good. The crackers browned just right, trapping all the juices inside the chicken and creating a golden crust that was crisp, savory, and rich without needing oil or a deep fryer. It was crunchy on the outside, tender in the middle, and budget-friendly all the way through. Families loved it because it felt like fried chicken night without the cleanup or cost. Even neighbors could smell it through the windows and knew someone was eating well. It was the kind of dish you could bring to a church supper and proudly pass off as something special. Ritz Cracker chicken coating wasn't just about saving money, it was about finding flavor where others saw leftovers. It was thrift at its finest, and nobody complained about seconds. Cheese toast under the broiler was the quick, melty after-school snack that could turn even the longest day around. Mothers made it because it took only a slice of bread, a sprinkle of cheese, and a few minutes under the broiler. As soon as the cheese bubbled and browned, the whole house smelled warm and comforting. Kids rushed to the kitchen the moment they heard that little sizzle. The edges of the bread crisped up while the center stayed soft, and the cheese melted into a perfect golden layer that stretched when they pulled it apart. It was simple, cheap, and endlessly satisfying. Mothers appreciated that it filled hungry kids fast without requiring a full meal. Kids begged for it because it felt indulgent even though it was made from the most basic ingredients. Cheese toast was the kind of small pleasure that defined 1960s afternoons, warm and familiar in all the right ways. Meatloaf was a handshake between hard times and good intentions. It was not steak, it was not even roast. It was ground beef stretched with breadcrumbs, onions, and eggs, molded into a loaf like it wanted to be something more. You baked it in a pan until the edges browned, and if you had ketchup, you glazed the top until it caramelized into a sweet, sticky crust. Meatloaf was a family meal, a leftover meal, a please God let this last 3 days kind of meal. It sat in the center of the table like it was proud to be made out of scraps. And maybe it was. It held together, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. Slice by slice, you ate it with mashed potatoes or just plain white bread, soaking up every bit of flavor. It was dense, it was heavy, and it was honest. Because meatloaf never pretended to be more than what it was, a way to make something out of not enough. Parsley noodle pudding brought a delicate herbal note to the classic baked noodle dish, turning inexpensive staples into a fragrant supper centerpiece. Wide egg noodles were cooked until just tender, then mixed with milk, eggs, a little butter, and a generous handful of freshly chopped parsley before baking to a golden finish. The custard base held everything together while the parsley added color and a bright, garden-fresh taste that lifted the entire dish. This pudding was equally welcome as a vegetarian main course or as a side alongside roasted vegetables. Because the ingredients were inexpensive and easy to keep on hand, it fit perfectly into the thrifty mindset of 1960s households. Home cooks appreciated how it could be assembled in advance and baked just before serving, freeing time for family or guests. Children enjoyed the mild flavor and silky texture, while adults admired its simple elegance. Parsley noodle pudding remains a quiet reminder that with a little imagination, even the most modest pantry can produce a meal worth remembering. Cucumber vinegar salad was a refreshing Depression-era side dish that added brightness to otherwise plain meals. Cucumbers were easy to grow in home gardens, and when combined with vinegar, water, and a pinch of sugar or salt, they became a simple but flavorful salad. Thinly sliced and chilled if possible, the cucumbers soaked up the tangy brine and provided crunch. For families living on beans, bread, and potatoes, this salad was a welcome change in texture and taste. It required almost no cooking, which was another benefit when fuel and time were scarce. Often served in large bowls at supper, it gave the sense of a fresh vegetable dish without requiring expensive ingredients. Sometimes onions or dill were added, but the core recipe was basic and thrifty. For many households, cucumber vinegar salad was a reminder that gardening and resourcefulness could provide something close to luxury in the hardest times. Now, if you think baking a cake without eggs, milk, or butter sounds impossible, think again. During the Dust Bowl, people got creative with their baking. This egg-free, milk-free, and butter-free cake was made with simple ingredients like flour, sugar, and vegetable oil. It was impossible to live without cake even in times of desperation, so people decided to make do without the fancy ingredients. Now, I know eggs, milk, and butter don't sound fancy to us, but these ingredients were a luxury to find during the Dust Bowl days, and even if you did find some, it was never enough to whip up a whole cake. The cake might not have been as rich as its traditional counterparts, but it was a sweet treat that offered a bit of comfort during difficult times. Lima bean soup is a little different. See, they wanted to scoop up all the grade A stuff, the easy sources of protein. I mean, you'd be pretty right in thinking that includes beans too, and yeah, lots of soldiers ate canned beans and soups made out of various beans. Luckily for everyone, there was, for once, just once during the war, enough to go around most of the country. Lima beans in particular were really popular throughout the Midwest and the South. Let me talk a little about what wartime cooking did for soups, though. While they were never really hurting for love or attention, you couldn't exactly call a bowl of soup the main attraction. Maybe today, in gourmet dining circles, that kind of thing could fly, but back then, there wasn't enough value for money. That quickly changed once people realized soups are actually a lot better all around when you make them at home. I'm not talking about taste, since that was still something people took time to get used to. I'm talking about utility. A soup can be readjusted so many times. It takes literally nothing but water as a base to make, and it can go around an entire large family. That's the kind of thing you hold on to tight during an economic breakdown, and nothing shows that better than lima bean soup. Oven-baked potato wedges were the crispy, perfectly seasoned alternative to store-bought fries that kids loved even more. Mothers cut potatoes into thick wedges, tossed them with a little oil and seasoning, and let the oven work its magic. As they baked, the edges crisped while the centers stayed soft and tender. Kids hovered near the oven window, waiting for that moment when the wedges turned golden brown. The smell alone promised something delicious. When served, they were hot, salty, and easy to dip in ketchup, making them irresistible. Mothers loved how affordable and healthy they were compared to anything from a diner kids begged for them because they tasted like real fries without the cost. Simple, crunchy, and comforting, these wedges were a quiet weeknight favorite in countless 1960s homes. Pea and egg salad plate was a thrifty supper that turned humble staples into a refreshing main dish for a warm evening. Canned peas were drained and chilled before being folded with chopped hard-boiled eggs, diced celery, and a splash of mild vinegar dressing. A pinch of dry mustard or a spoon of mayonnaise added just enough richness to bind everything together while still keeping the cost low. Served on crisp lettuce leaves or alongside sliced tomatoes from the backyard garden, it provided protein and texture without any need for meat. Home cooks loved how quickly it came together using pantry items that were inexpensive and easy to find year-round. Children enjoyed the gentle sweetness of the peas, while adults appreciated the subtle tang from the dressing. This simple combination was light enough for summertime, but filling enough to carry a family through a busy evening, reflecting the practical yet creative spirit of mid-century kitchens, where canned vegetables and eggs formed the backbone of many dependable weeknight meals. Now pull a 5-cent cookbook back off the shelf this week and pick one of these to set in front of the family on a Wednesday night. Make the tomato soup cake for somebody who misses their grandmother. Fry the Johnny cakes for grandchildren who only know boxed pancake mix. Or build the Spam loaf the way the 1942 binder laid it out. Sit at the table, not the couch, and let the kitchen smell sit in the room for a full hour. Tell us in the comments which dollar meal carried your own family through a lean stretch nobody talks about anymore.